Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much. I'll speak from here, but I mean, I'm looking basically at empty row seats. So all right. So I'm going to talk about cohesion and the explanation of constitutional choice in self-governing systems. This is a collective work of 6 of us with colleagues from different places, and you'll see why it is that we needed 6 of us to do this. And of course, Asimina is here in the front row. So, sorry, there we go. Yeah. The argument that I want to make, not that I can see you can see the title in the slide, but essentially that the future is indisputably, inevitably, and irreversibly hybrid, in the fact that we're going to see increasing numbers of next generation socio-technical systems, which will involve the interaction of what we call human intelligence or natural life with computational intelligence, or a life or AI or whatever. Now, don't want to be exceptionalist human about this. It's not the only type of end life that we get or a life, but these are the kinds that we're really focusing on. So what does that mean for communities and societies when these communities and societies contain an ashby of unpurposeful random mechanisms, each seeking their own purpose through learning? Okay, so I'm using the ashby here and making this up as the collective noun for what he called these unpurposeful random mechanisms that were basically running around, making their own meaning for themselves through processes of learning and innovation. But also, what does that mean? It's going to mean for the actual humans that are involved in this, the natural life components. Yeah? And this actually takes us into some fairly deep questions of political philosophy. So, for example, how is it that we're going to live our digital lives together in a better way? How is it that we're going to realize what Aristotle talked about? Eudaimonia? That one. Yeah, thank you. Or human flourishing, as it were. And what it might even mean for human rights when you've got groups of which comprise artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and the artificial intelligence is making decisions which is affecting the humans. And this is what the Oxford philosopher John Tsoulias talks about, is to what extent do humans have a human right to a human decision. Indeed, we can also see it actually gets to the very essence of what it means to be human in terms of exercising our constitutive capacities as being people. So it turns out that, cohesion is I'm sorry you can't see the title of the slide, but trust me, this says cohesion up there somewhere. It's a critical factor in successful and sustainable collective action. Now, there are many perspectives on this, and some will know about the work of Elinor Ostrom and her 8 features for self-governing institutions for successful and sustainable common pool resource management. Josiah Ober talked about groups having a shared set of congruent values. Agnieszka Rich-Wolska has talked about, when she studied digital communities online, it turns out that the age of the community, the expertise of the people within it, and the task complexity all have to be aligned in order for the benefits of collective action to be realized. And David Graeber and David Wengrow, in their book, The Dawn of Everything, talk about these decentralized collective identities, these communities or polities which actually had this essential identity to which people belong to. And this was, in effect, the cohesion. So although all these different perspectives on it, and I think as we have seen in the previous talk, it's rather difficult to define. And then in particular, it looks like it's one of those things that, we know what it is, but we can't say what it is. It's got this kind of paradoxical nature to it. So if we can't say what it is, and we can't define it, and we can't see it, it makes it rather difficult to metric it, and then also to represent and reason with it if we want to actually do something to increase it. So it clearly seems to have something to do with these 4 factors. So there's an element of choice involved, that you're getting involved in a voluntary association, that you agreed to participate in this collective. There's an element of control. To what extent do you participate in the selection, the modification, the enforcement of rules? There's an element of affinity involved, and this is the kinship relations which are created. So we're actually, this is what Murray Bookchin, the social ecologist, talks about when he says establishing affinity groups, that these are groups of people for whom the kinship relations are actually as important as the problem they're actually trying to solve. Yeah? So we're treating these kinship relations now as first-class objects. Yeah? And a fourth factor seems to be actually understanding what's going on, to actually know why things are established as the way they are. But above all that, it seems to be the emergent phenomenon, that something that comes out of these interactions and the relationships that are formed, and the fact that people stay together in some sense. Yeah. So the essential proposition behind this paper was that we propose that there is some kind of behavioral connection between the emergence of social cohesion and the self-determination and explanation of or for constitutional choice rules. So how are we going to observe constitutional choice here? Well, the essential thing, of course, is that this is people involved in here. And one of the things that people are really good at is making stuff up. Yeah. And of course, one of the key factors in Ostrom's observation about successful common pool resource management is the way that, confronted with an operational choice rule, what people did was to construct these political metagames on top of it, which affected the choices that people would make, because they would voluntarily comply with the mutually agreed rules. And you could then use that agreement to avoid the inevitable tragedies that were supposed to be predicted by the simple game theoretic analysis. Yeah. But then on top of that, if you're going to have these meta-political games as a meta rules to your operational choice games, you then get these meta-political games as well. And this is the issue of actually deciding issues in this constitution. And this goes back 2,500 years at least, because these were the questions that were exercising Plato. When you're trying to work out who it was that is making the rules. And of course, then we also get issues that Karl Popper observed. How do you remove a bad ruler once you've put one in place? Yeah. Of course, another issue of constitutional choice is this dilemma of the rules, because you want it to be sufficiently restricted so you've got as much freedom of collective action as possible. But on the other hand, you've got to restrict it somehow in order to resist what the sociologist Michel's called the iron law of oligarchy. This was the entropic tendency of organizations, no matter how democratically you found it originally, it tends towards producing this oligarchy as a small group run the institution in their own narrow interest rather than the public interest. And then, of course, when it comes out to understanding constitutions, there's a whole range of, in terms of answering this who rules questions, different types of ocracy and different types of archy, and also variations within these things. And this is, at least to the extent I understand it, is one of the other things that Plato was going on about in the Republic when he was talking about forms and perfect forms. And so you can kind of distinguish the types of constitution that you've got according to the numbers of people that are making the rules. That's either one, few, or many. And of course, the perfect form when you've just one ruler is this benign dictator that's doing nice things for everybody. And the degenerate form was when you get an autocracy with a tyrant of some kind. When you only have a few, then you are relying upon an enlightened and responsible aristocracy to rule things in the majority interest. But as we're seeing with the iron law of oligarchy, it can degenerate into this form. And even when you have many, our perfect form is the democracy that we think we know so well. But of course, there's a degenerate form of that, which is majoritarian tyranny, which is what happens when a small majority keeps on taking control and again runs it in their interests and excludes other sectional interests. So if these are the things, how are we going to actually measure what's going on? So one of the things that we first have to realize is that these are trajectories in a field, not points in a space. And Dryzek and Pickering actually pointed out that there were 4 pairs of opposing system drivers that are involved in here. So you're trying to trade off expertise against public participation, polycentricity, where you have multiple centers of decision-making, versus centralization, where you just have one. You're trying to balance out diversity versus consensus, because you need a diversity of knowledge, but you also want to come to some kind of consensus decision, and the balancing out flexibility versus stability. And these are systems that have been modeled by Asimina. And it's kind of like you've got a marble on a plate, and you're trying to keep the marble on the plate, and you just, every time you move it, you succeed in moving things in one direction, but it upsets it in another. And so then you can see that actually what you've got is you're moving in a field, if you like. And another way of looking at this now, when we go from one system to a system of systems, is that you've got this zone of dignity that is defined. The zone of, is that all? No, it's not. I started at 48. Yes, yes. And you're moving in this. I'm going to explain the zone of dignity later. Yeah. So how are we going to manage this? So the experimental framework that we've been putting together is sort of like an interdisciplinary thing, which brings together game theory. We defined our own regime change game, why you would change from one regime to another. We're formalizing that proposing to formalize that in a mathematical framework of the augmented transition systems with values, and then use that as a basis for implementing a multi-agent system in this, what we call this megabyte scenario with theory of mind agents. And then using this idea from information theory due to actually Randall Beer, who's here at some point, this framework for partial information decomposition, where we can actually look at issues of causal decoupling and downwards causation to see if there are properties of the group that cannot necessarily be predicted just from properties of the individuals, and that is our cohesion, So this is the basic framework that we're trying to set up. And I'll just briefly mention the megabyte scenario because it relates to some of the things that have been talked about earlier. But the idea is that there are these bikes that you can get, the multi-rider bikes, not just tandems. And you get up to 8 riders, and they've all got a way of steering it and moving it around, and they've all got a pedal, and they can all brake and so on. And we envisage this scenario, and you have one of these bikes with, let's say 8 riders on it, and you have to pedal around this micro world, collecting bits of food, a bit like the homonyms that we've just seen, out of these loot boxes, and avoiding an existential threat, which is trying to run you over. And for anybody who's ever driven a bike in London, you know exactly what that feels like. So now, one of the key things about this, of course, is that actually what we're trying to do is not just analyze one game, but we're trying to analyze multiple interacting interdependent games at the same time. So we've got this whole range of games that starts off with the voluntary association, the agreement on the rules, the enactment of the rules. We've also got to assign roles because we're concerned also with institutionalized power. You've got to distribute the resources that you get from the loot boxes in the linear public goods game. Actually, this is to do with the steerage, because literally you've got some free riding going on, because the best way of doing this is you sit there doing nothing, and everybody else on the bike pedals frantically towards a loot box, and then you take the advantage of it. And of course, we've got lots of monitoring. There's a collective risk dilemma. And we've even got cooperation and competition that might emerge between the bikes themselves. Now, at this point, of course, this actually says methods, experiments, and results, because this is, I don't have time to go into this. And normally I would actually direct you to the paper to say you can read about these things in the paper, but unfortunately in this case I can't, because there aren't any experiments results in the paper either. So it's because this is a proposition that we are making here that we wanted to get feedback on. So I'd like to conclude then by saying, though, that this kind of agent-based modeling of human behavior is precisely the kind of thing that we're going to see in the future. And so if we can actually find out what's going on here, using human-in-the-loop experiments, we can actually try and get some kind of understanding of what it means for N-life and A-life hybrid collectives. I think it's one of the things I've learned in the last few days about the explicit representation of institutions for some kind of theory of socially extended mind, which I got from Sean Gallagher's fascinating talk earlier on. I also like to conclude with some beliefs, that the reason, at least, why the N-life purposeless random mechanisms actually evolved this capacity to engage with these political and constitutional metagames was precisely because it offers the species this effective, efficient, and mutually satisfiable way to solve these collective action problems that will inevitably arise when a group of individuals with different preferences and priorities on those preferences has to live together and at scale. Yeah? But I would also say that one of the things that this might expose is this paradox that the most hazardous threat to a democracy might actually be a democratically elected government if it will not act in good faith. Yeah? And of course, having not been able to explain cohesion, I'm now not explain faith either, but this is a faith that, that we have to make in the governments that we elect. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.